Tonight, I'm really excited. We are going to learn about solar power, which is something I am very personally curious about because I have no idea where to even get started on that kind of thing. So hopefully Mike can help us. Mike Maxwell he's the chair of our Salt Lake area chapter and does an outstanding job. So we're happy to have him here tonight sharing more of his expertise. Mike started his career at one of the largest electric energy producers in the United States and has been an energy geek ever since, which is what he called himself. So not us. He now provides all the electric power to his home with a rooftop solar array, and to 3 electric vehicles, which he has. So he powers all of those with the solar array, which is pretty impressive. He has implemented home solar twice in the past decade on 2 different homes. So we're hoping he can share his experience with us. And for anyone just joining us, if you want to put in the chat where you're from, we kind of got off to a little bit late start, but you can go ahead and put that in there if you want to let us know, because it's always fun to see where people are joining from. And with all of that being said, Mike, I think I'm ready to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Chloe. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for logging into this session. Solar energy is something I get pretty excited about. So hopefully I can share some enthusiasm and knowledge with all of you in our session this evening. So we are going to complement this session with a Latter-day Saint faith-based angle. So you'll get some really practical knowledge and a little bit of maybe a theological relevance as well. I'll just start with a passage from Latter-day Saint scripture referring to the resources of our planet and cosmos. Doctrine and Covenants says the earth is full and there is enough to spare. We have enough resources on this planet for everybody. That certainly includes energy. It's always a distribution problem to figure out how to be fair and equitable about how we share that. And so solar gives us a great opportunity for that. It's by far the most plentiful and arguably lowest cost energy resource that we have access to in the cosmos. As far as agenda go, I'm going to do a quick introduction around myself. We'll talk about some reasons for home solar, talk about what home solar is, just give some definitions. I'll share my journey around home solar. Chloe mentioned I've been at this for over 10 years, done it with a couple of different residences, learned a lot in the process. Hopefully I can share some of that with you. Give a little bit of color on how you can look at your own situation. Solar is great. It's not a fit for every residential property, but it is a fit for many of them. So that we'll cover that, and then I'll finish with a few other considerations with regard to energy and such. Chloe, if you're there, I'm getting the notifications of people in waiting rooms. I'm trying to let them in. I don't know if you're also getting those,
yeah,
but
I can get it. So don't worry about it. I'll do it.
Okay, I just didn't want to leave somebody in limbo.
Yeah, no, you're fine. You can. I'll take care of it.
Okay, great. And we will use the chat feature a couple times, as Chloe has let us already. If you don't know where it is, usually it's in a little button here in the lower right hand side of your screen. We'll also use a couple of the other buttons for a little interactive activity as we go through this. So with that, I will ask that as you have questions throughout, where I can, I'll try to keep my eye on the chat, answer questions. Certainly, I expect we'll have plenty of room for any Q&A that anybody wants at the end if I don't get your questions as we talk through the presentation. So I'll just give a little bit of background on myself. For those of you with a Latter-day Saint background, which is probably most of you, I spent my formative years living in Nauvoo, Illinois. And this little photograph here was one of the two intact sunstones from the original Nauvoo temple that was built in the 1830s. in Nauvoo. If you're familiar with the history, that building was burned and then dismantled a few days after the Mormons migrated to Utah. And when I lived there as a kid, other than this sunstone that was sitting in a city park, that's all we had as remnants. Some of you are aware it's now been rebuilt. It's a beautiful edifice, but these sunstones, I was always really just sort of enamored with these as a kid. I just thought they were unlike any other symbol in my faith or anybody else's. And so I still, when I think of the sun and sort of the spiritual connection to the sun, I think about these carvings from that temple from 160, 170 years ago. Growing up in the Midwest, my first significant job out of college was working at Commonwealth Edison. It was the electric power generator and distributor for the metropolitan Chicago area. We had about 13, oops, my screen just leaked out of me here. Let's try to get back to this. So we had about 13 million subscribers at the time. Part of my role was doing long-term demand projections. Building capacity for an energy grid is a big challenge. It's very expensive. This picture is of the now decommissioned Zion nuclear plant, which was a large nuclear generation facility sitting right on the banks of Lake Michigan, which was always a scary proposition for a whole bunch of reasons. It's since been dismantled. So I kind of got into energy from that perspective and have been sort of enamored with it ever since. Just a couple of things about me. I have some humanitarian things I do. I got to travel to Ecuador earlier this summer for some of that work. Saw some of the extreme energy challenges that developing nations had as a part of my visit there. And it's always humbling to recognize how truly blessed we are as a really advanced society to have some of the great options that we have for energy, including the opportunity to generate it with a low or no emissions capability. My wife joined me. We hiked the Cotopaxi crater, not all the way to the top because it was volcanic activity, but we're at about 16,000 feet here. One of my other love and passions in life is just exploring nature and the outdoors and experiencing the world that way. And this was just like a really epic experience for us. I have an amazing family. Some of them probably get tired of me and my energy geeking out, but they're overall, really super supportive of me, and I love them all. Think the world of them. I think there's a couple of them on this call today. I am, in addition to being a self-proclaimed energy geek, I am an electric vehicle geek. I own 3 electric vehicles, 2 automobiles, and 1 electric tractor that is the snowplow for my property in the winter and serves as a yard tractor and lawn cutter in the summer. So I've really converted all of my vehicles to electric, given that I'm fortunate enough to have the solar capacity to power them. So that's a little bit of me. That's stuff that gets me excited. Just want to get some feedback from everybody here. I'd love to get, if you go to the reactions button, it's usually at the bottom of your screen, or it might be over in the more, but just give me a wave if anybody on here already has a home solar. And I'm curious about that. I'll also ask you, to raise your hand if you're considering home solar in the next 5 years. So anybody that's on a journey going that direction. And then lastly, you can enter into the chat button just any specifics about your interest in solar. So got a few people who are considering it in the next 5 years. So that's very cool. Again, hopefully some of my learned experience can contribute to you making the move, and I'll certainly volunteer at the end of this presentation to be a resource for anybody that's on there. Or are there any other questions or insights I can answer? So, reasons for home solar. I'll start out with one that really is drawn from our faith and then get into some practical and impractical reasons. Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship is all about Earth stewardship. We have, particularly in our Latter-day scripture, there's a great call to be stewards of the earth. I read one of those scriptures earlier, but probably a number of you are familiar. There are many more. It's something I think is relative unique in world religions, Judeo-Christian traditions, and others, are some of the really specific calls that we have as Latter-day Saints to care for the earth. And as Latter-day Saints, we tend to get busy with a lot of things. Not everybody, pays as much attention to this particular topic, but the fact that you're all here are there. We also have opportunities to be examples of good practices, of good Earth stewardship practices, and you are inevitably at least somewhat visible when you're using solar and electric for your transportation, for your home generation. So gives you an opportunity to be a good example of good Earth stewardship. Practical reasons. I'm going to spend some time getting into each of these a little bit more specifically, but there are economic practical reasons for home solar. There are some that are just purely self-reliance, and we'll talk about those. And then there are some related to sustainability. Those are all very practical. There are also some impractical reasons. Some of it is novelty and innovation. I am a self-admitted technology geek when it comes to solar energy and electric power, and I get a lot of sort of hobbyist satisfaction out of that. There are also, something that I probably connect it to my identity. Other people do as well. Again, those probably are less practical, but there are reasons, and they're valid and they work for me. Our church is setting a good example. The church tends to be relatively quiet about setting the example around solar energy. This article here, some of you may have seen this. This was just published in the church news a couple of weeks ago, and talked about some solar. You can see some panels on top of. There's the steeple. There's a Latter-day Saint meeting house with solar. Church is starting to do some of that. Here's an article from last year. The picture you probably can't see very well, but it's some meeting house complexes in Southeast Asia that have fairly extensive solar arrays applied to them. You can see a couple other articles. This one is in Farmington, Utah, about some solar panels were applied on a church building there a few years ago. Mesa, Arizona, again, a great place for solar since you've got such plentiful sunlight there. So we are seeing the church as an example in the institutional church, but of course, those of us that participate in the Latter-day Saint community can be examples as well in this kind of stewardship. Okay, so let's talk about what home solar is and some of the key components. I've got a drawing here. I have, it starts, of course, with the sun. So I don't have a picture of the sun here, but you put panels usually on your roof, and panels collect the sun's energy, and essentially that transfers into what's called an inverter. It transfers as I won't geek out on this too much, but it transfers as direct current. Now, everything in your house, there's virtually nothing in your house that can use direct current. So that direct current solar has to go to what's called an inverter. An inverter turns it into alternating current, and that's where that's the form that it reaches the outlets that you plug your refrigerator, or your washing machine, your iron, your electric lights, your chargers for your laptop, all of those cables into the alternating current circuit. In direct current form, if you choose to get a battery, a storage battery for your home electric, Your batteries, most batteries are also, in fact, all batteries are stored as direct current. And again, once you start using the battery, it runs through your inverter and goes to the same place. Now, typically with home solar, you all also stay connected to the power grid. We'll talk a little bit about going off grid, but there are some advantages to staying connected to the power grid. And so your electricity, your unused electricity, generally, when the sun's shining brightly, you're probably not using all of the electricity in your house. And when you're not, you can transfer that out to the grid. And most of the grid operators around the world will give you some kind of credit. They're essentially buying that unused electric power that you generate, and then they can turn around and sell it to other clients of theirs. All of this technology is pretty new stuff, and there's generally apps that you use to control it, to monitor it. If you're geeky like me, you kind of look at the mathematics of what you're generating and when, and is it saving you money, and or if it isn't. But there's some really good control apps there. We'll talk a little bit more about those as well. So let's talk about the sun. So the yellow and orange on this graph, this is a 24-hour graph, so midnight to midnight. So you 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Sun comes up in this drawing, probably between 5 and 6. And as the sun rises, it gets brighter. And what that does is create more energy production on your grid. So you go through the day, get to the middle of the day, the sun's at its peak, assuming there are not clouds or other obstructions in the way. You're getting full power at that point, and then of course the sun starts to set lower in the sky. It's going to be directing less power to your panels to the point where it sets, and then there's no power coming from the sun. So the obvious probably point of this slide is that your utilization of your power usually doesn't match the sun very well. So the blue line is the power you're typically consuming in your home. So you're late night, you're going to bed, maybe you're up watching a little TV around midnight, but then you're not off to sleep. You're not using electric lights, you don't have the TV on, you're not running the washing machine. Depending on what time of year it is, your air conditioning may or may not be operating. So you kind of hit a low power utilization there. And then of course, in the morning when you wake, your power utilization increases, you turn on the lights, you maybe turn on cooking appliances to make your breakfast. You might throw some clothes in the washing machine, or throw some wet clothes in the dryer that you had in the washer overnight. And then assuming you jump in the car and head off to work, your utilization likely drops some. Particularly if you don't work at home, it's going to drop off. Hopefully you have a smart thermostat and you don't have the air conditioning cranked up while you're away from the house. But during that time, the sun continues to do its thing and is high. Towards the day, you get home from work, you crank the air conditioning back up. You're turning on the TV, and then you catch some evening entertainment. You're doing a little bit more laundry, putting some stuff in the dryer. Maybe you've got a hobby and doing some power tools. You're working on your computer, and that tends to be the peak time for your power consumption. And then as kids get to bed, you start to wind down, turn off the lights, turn off the TV. The power winds down for another day. So the energy coming from your panels doesn't always, match up your utilization very well on a day-to-day basis. And so where you're not drawing enough power from your panels, that's where your system is defaulting back to that electric power grid where you live, and it's filling in this gap with the power. Or if you've invested in batteries and you've charged maybe you charged your batteries yesterday, you're using your batteries to power your home and fill this gap while the sun's not at peak. And then of course, when the sun gets to peak, where you're not needing all that power, you're connected to the grid And so you're essentially selling all this extra power to the local power company, and they're probably, reselling it to office buildings and, retail locations that are in full operation and running, air conditioning and other such things. So, so solar power really has a real nice benefit, even though power generation and distribution companies are all over the board in terms of how much they compensate for you. It actually helps them balance the grid, because they have to they have this equation for hundreds or thousands or even millions of homes that they're providing power to. And so as you can see, if you combine what they're generating with what you're generating, it really kind of helps balance the grid. So I won't spend any more time on this. If you have more questions, I can answer at the end. But the sun doesn't always provide the energy when you need it, and therefore having some degree of connection with a power source that isn't the sun, either in the form of batteries or your local power grid. There are other forms as well. Is something that you have to manage when you're considering home solar. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey to solar. It actually started in 2009. I started seeing solar panels out there, and I actually went out and priced how much it would cost me to put solar panels on my house. And I priced, given the cost of those panels and the amount of electric savings, because I wouldn't have to buy it from the grid anymore. So this is going to save me a certain amount of money. What's the return on investment? How long would it take in energy savings for those panels to pay for themselves? And I was kind of shocked to learn at that time, and this was still when solar energy was very uncommon, that it would have taken me about 40 years for those panels to generate enough power to recoup the cost I would have paid for them. And the bigger problem with that equation then was that solar panels were only expected to produce effectively for about 25 years. So to get into home solar, 15 years ago, you had to be more of I'd say earth steward than I even was at the time. And so I decided at that point to hold off, to watch the technology develop, and maybe at some point it would reach an economical phase that I would be more comfortable with. And so I didn't pay a lot of attention for a few years until Tesla started producing cars. And with my electric energy geekiness, I sort of got really enamored with electric vehicles. And of course, Tesla was doing some incredibly innovative things with the technological developments they were making. And so I was like, I got to get a Tesla. And I got really excited because, and Teslas are zero emissions. They don't emit any, there's no carbon emissions. So this is good for the environment, right? Well, as I started reading about it, I sort of had this think again moment. We said, well, the energy that you power your electric vehicle with needs to be clean in order for that electric vehicle to truly be zero emissions. And if you're charging up the battery in that electric vehicle with a dirty form of energy, you're actually not helping the environment. And so doing a little bit of research, I discovered that, I live in northern Utah, and the grid in northern Utah at that time was over 80% generated with coal. And what I discovered at that time, that if I were to buy an electric vehicle, even though it said zero emissions on it, if I had to power it with the local grid with coal, I would actually be producing more carbon emissions than if I was driving a traditional gas-powered vehicle. So, I couldn't bring myself to do that. And I said, well, I just got to wait till I can make this work with solar or some other clean energy source, because, we got enough carbon in the atmosphere. If you're familiar with northern Utah, we have a lot of problems with particulate matter in the air. We call them inversions here. And, particularly during the winter, a lot of the, emissions from, power and other things get kind of stuck in the atmosphere and really create some, we have some of the worst air quality problems in the United States at times in the wintertime here. So I didn't want to be contributing to that. So started doing research again on solar. And what I discovered then was that by 2015, the cost of solar panels had dropped pretty dramatically. And I was pretty excited about that, because what I discovered in 2015 was that, particularly including, there were both a U.S. federal government and also state government rebates. With those rebates, all of a sudden the financial dynamics had become very reasonable. And in fact, it was about 8 to 9 years that it would take for the energy cost savings to cover the cost of the panels. And at that point, I got my panels on my first house, went out, bought my Tesla, and as they say, the rest is history. I learned a lot. This was my first home that I put panels on. Did that in 2015. It was a 6,000 watt system, which was enough to power one electric vehicle and all the energy needs for that home year round. So again, dryers, stoves, television, home computers, all of that energy. This power array gave me enough energy to power all of that. At that time, I did not get any battery backup. The batteries were, not only were they exorbitantly expensive at that time, they were impossible to even get. They were in such a short supply. So we built that. The other thing I did was the way I talked earlier about that inverter, that little box that takes the direct current and converts it into alternating current. So which is what all the plugs in your home are in. Well, this particular array at that time, only, if the power were to go down, I could only plug into the inverter itself. It wasn't going to power all of the other outlets in my home in the case of a power outage, which originally I thought, well, that's not big a deal. How likely is a power outage? But about 4 years into this house, we had a major power outage in the Salt Lake City area. My parents were completely without power for 5 days. Due to that outage, it was a huge snowstorm, and it took down, pretty devastating to our grid for a number of days. So where I lived, the power lines were underground, so we didn't actually have the outage. But I saw the impact it had on my parents, and if I ever do this solar panel thing again, I'm going to set this up so that, I have more options to use my grid than just walking into the garage and plugging into that box. I want to be able to use it more completely. Well, not too long after that, my wife and I, for a bunch of reasons, decided to sell this house and move. And moving gave me an opportunity to kind of take in what I'd learned from this house and apply it to a second house. So 2019, bought this house, was kind of a fixer-upper. But when I bought this house, I committed myself to say I'm going to put enough solar on this house so that I can power my electric vehicle as well as my wife's and everything else the house is going to use for energy, which was about 9,000 watts to power 3 electric vehicles as well as the rest of the home. Part of the reason I chose this house, it had this really perfect south-facing roof. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple of slides, but the direction, the angle of your roof is really important as you're considering solar. So it had this really great roof where I could put most of the panels, and then it had this west-facing roof that I also needed to get to that 9,000 watts of output, power everything I wanted to power. And I did have to put some panels on that roof, which wasn't as an ideal a roof angle as this one, but it was still pretty good. I did get battery backup. By this time, even though I literally was on a waiting list for a year to get these Tesla batteries. And these batteries give me enough power that if I used it, if the grid were to go down, that I could keep all the basic tech in my home running for 5 days. And it was also gave me a setup to where I could actually take any power that had been stored up in my my 2 Tesla vehicles and power that back to home use as well. So it gave me a lot more, again, that self-reliance. You know, if there's some kind of catastrophe, I've got some much better options for, you know, using the power that I'm generating off my grid for a variety of home uses. I won't get into detail on microinverters, but it's you know, I'll just suffice to say that that, you know, if you have, you know, one of the things we had with the panels that we added to this home were there were some very large trees that we didn't want to cut down that certain times of the day would cover part of the panel array. And so having what's called the right micro inverter configuration is important, so that some of the panels are active, even others are shaded. And so you can, you know, I'm happy to go into as much detail as anyone wants on that topic, but it's if your roof gets hit by shade certain times of the day, the microinverter configuration is an important thing to be aware of. So 2020 bought the other 2 electric vehicles, and so we've been running all electric from our home ever since. So that's my journey. If you want to throw some things in the chat, I'm going to talk about economic reasons, self-reliance reasons, sustainability reasons. If there are other reasons you're looking at solar beyond just general Earth sustainability, you can add those as well. But any feedback that you want to share, I'm looking in the chat. I'll just keep my eye on the chat here and see if anybody adds them here. We got sustainability, others coming up here. Okay, so let's talk about the economic factors first. As I mentioned, when I first looked at solar, you know, it's going to take 40 years to generate enough power to financially justify it. Didn't make sense. Solar really makes sense now. If you're going to be in your home more than 6 to 8 years, the economic, and you have, again, with the caveat, you have a good roof configuration and it's ideal, you know, it's a good solid placement for solar. 6 to 8 years and solar will pay for itself. You know, the bill I get from Rocky Mountain Power every month now to be connected to the grid is $16 a month. So it doesn't eliminate your costs completely, but I really enjoy that $16 a month electric bill when I hear you know, some of the summer bills of, you know, friends and family and neighbors being in the hundreds of dollars sometimes in really sunny and warm climates. So that but there's an equation, a math equation come up to figure out what your return on investment would be. Lots of sustainability and self-reliance coming up in the chat, so we'll get to those as well. I do want to mention, I thought this was probably a good place to talk about under economic. There's a question: is your roof an ideal angle for solar? Is it located in a way that you're really going to get, you know, real good solar performance? And unfortunately, not every roof is. Google has a really useful website. It's called Google Project Sunroof, and you can just Google that. You put your address in, and it will literally show you your home, and it'll show you the roof angles, like the ones that are bright yellow, almost gold colors. So this is a really good south-facing roof here, although there's a little bit of tree shade on, you know, one corner of it. But some of these other roofs that aren't bright, you know, they're more of an orange color because of the angle relative to the sun, not as ideal. So you know, anybody on this call, you can put your address in to Google Project Sunroof, and it'll bring up a map. It'll also give you some estimated metrics of the size of the roof available for solar panels, how many hours per year. If you look at solar, eventually you're going to have to talk to a solar equipment, installation company, this is some of the exact information they're going to be interested in as well, to figure out how many panels, which angles of the roof, and so forth. So, so this is a great way. Look at this. This is actually a picture of my parents' house, and my parents live a ways north of me in Salt Lake. Unfortunately, there's only a very small portion of their roof that is ideal for solar because of the angle, and it wouldn't be enough to even fully power their home year round. So in their case, they decided, not to do solar. Everybody's different in terms of how you get that calculus, the combination of economic, sustainability, and self-reliance. But those three factors are always one that come into consideration. When you put solar panels on your roof, once you put them on, you really aren't able to replace the roof shingles under that. Fortunately, the life of solar panels is pretty similar to the life of roof shingles. Solar panels now are 25 to 30-year life. Most particular asphalt roof shingles, which are the most common shingles that people are using today in the US, have a very similar life. Now, if you're using, terracotta tile, if you're in, like Arizona or California, where you're in really sunny climates, those roof shingles tend to will outlast your solar panels. For both of the houses that I put solar on, because of the age of the house, absolutely made sense for me to replace the roof shingles before I replaced or before I put the solar panels on. The advantage of doing that is you can also apply some of the roof reshingling towards, depending on which state you're in, but also federal energy credits. So, those credits you can get, this is US, the US federal government, or depending on which state you're in, part of the cost of replacing those shingles on your roof, if you do that for and on behalf of applying your solar panels, you can use that replacement in the equation of your of the credits that you can get on your tax rebates for solar. So it's a little extra incentive to replace your roof tiles, in conjunction with putting solar panels on. Solar panel companies that sell them, they have both leasing and purchasing options. I chose to buy both times. I did it from the same vendor. One, located here in the Wasatch Front. They're actually located in Utah County, but they did a wonderful job for me on my first roof, and I used them on my second. I purchased panels from them, but there are companies that will do leasing models. I would caution you to be really careful with the leasing models, because what a lot of the leasing models do is they try to set up an arrangement where they're going to pay your power bill, and they're going to pay your for your panels and all the equipment, and they'll manage that all together as one complete system for 20 or 30 years. I haven't seen a situation where those have not been, at least in Utah where I've looked at them, I've not seen a situation where it ends up being considerably more expensive, like 20% more expensive over the life of the panels, to leverage one of those all-in-one leasing models versus buying. There is a convenience factor to the leasing model. They do kind of take care of everything for you, including your power bill. In Utah, that's with Rocky Mountain Power. But they obviously have to make a profit. So there's more of a service fee they're going to carve off. And there may be exceptions to this, but certainly here in Utah, having looked at a few, I never saw a leasing model that was not significantly more expensive than buying the panels. Lastly, I mentioned credits already. There are still credits from the US federal government that you can get for your panels. So when you do your annual taxes, the year after you buy the panels, they'll deduct a certain amount off your tax bill with respect to panels. I believe it's still 30% of your installation costs, which can include the portion of your your roof that you replace around your panels, if you choose to do that, that can be a tax credit for you. And then it's different in every state. Utah has actually been reducing their tax credit, but there is still a small tax credit. I know that you can get on your state of Utah taxes. Again, every state is different on this. I think the sunny states tend to be a lot more aggressive with their credits. From what I've seen, just sort of talking with people in Nevada and California and Arizona, but I know it varies across the United States in terms of the credits that are available. So that's all the economic stuff I'll mention. Let's talk about self-reliance. So self-reliance is, to me, when it comes to electricity, again, watching my parents live without any electricity in the middle of February for 5 days, that was pretty rough. That can happen to any of us. I know, Chloe, I know you live in Arizona or in Texas, and Texas had a pretty terrible grid failure outage 2 or 3 years ago, where the majority of the state was down. The way they had architected their power grid across the state of Texas, it was a market-based approach that was at its time very innovative, but didn't properly account for failure risk and including some of the major metropolitan areas. The majority of the state was without power, for many days, and so solar energy is great because when the sun's up, you've got energy. But then if you decide to invest in batteries, you've also got energy when the sun is down. In the case of outages, there are people that I hear about online that are completely severing their connection from the grid. They're buying enough batteries to where they can just use their panels and store enough energy in their batteries and or in the batteries in their electric vehicles to power their grid 24/7. I looked at that, but at the time when I did my current setup, it was so hard to get any batteries that it wasn't feasible. And I also couldn't make the economics really work for me. It would have been really expensive to buy that level of battery, and kind of like my experience back in 2009. I would have living, if I was in this house for 30 years, I would have paid far more for the batteries than the power I was generating, leveraging the grid. So that's probably changed a lot just in the last. It's been 3 years now since I bought these batteries. I know the cost of batteries have dropped substantially. The production volume of batteries has grown substantially. I haven't looked closely at it, but I'm sure it's far more feasible, not just for self-reliance purposes, but even economically, to go completely off-grid with batteries than it was even 3 years ago. But you definitely would want to evaluate your own situation to go completely off the grid. But I think it's something over the next decade we'll start to see lots of people do around the world, because it will make sense economically, and not relying on that grid connection is a nice kind of self-reliance. And then you completely control the carbon emissions and the energy sources that are being utilized to generate your electricity. So expect more of that in the future. Okay, last thing, sustainability. So I talked already about the fact that emissions, carbon emissions, obviously huge problem for the planet right now. Although there's amazing work going on all over the planet figuring out how to reduce that. Solar energy is a big part of that equation, and so that's an important factor in sustainability. Depending on where you live, air pollution independent of carbon is also an important factor. Certainly in the Salt Lake Valley here in Utah, it is. I mentioned the inversions earlier. Particulate matter, people with asthma really have a rough time when we get in these inversion states. So again, not contributing to that kind of air pollution. That's a kind of stewardship that we can bless our fellows on this planet with. You'll want to do your research on how the grid is powered in your area. There are parts of the country, Iowa, for instance. I actually got to meet with a congressional representative from the state of Iowa last week, talking about how the state of Iowa is predominantly powered with renewables now, primarily wind power. If you've ever driven from Omaha to Des Moines, it's a wind farm the whole way, and it's pretty phenomenal what they've done there. So if you're living in a place where the grid is predominantly powered by clean renewables, then maybe not solar isn't right for you. It's there's still some of the other factors we talked about. Conversely, if you live in a place like Utah where we're still over 80% coal powered, and it's not very clean coal, contrary to some of the marketing language that they've tried to use here. Coal, natural gas, some of those are contributing, continue to contribute to carbon in the atmosphere, and it's not taking our planet a direction that we want to go in terms of global temperatures. Batteries, again, I mentioned this is a really emerging area right now. They were pretty expensive and not and just hard to get when I got mine three and a half years ago. But I know that production glut has improved a lot. The costs of them have gone down some. They're not super cheap yet, but they're less expensive than they were 3 years ago. And so all those things give you the opportunity to use the sun that warms our planet for all kinds of stuff at your home. I mentioned both of the automobiles we drive are electric. Our tractor that we use for our lawn and garden and for snow plowing is electric. There's been amazing innovations in all kinds of electric technologies. Certainly light bulbs is an easy one. Rechargeable batteries, things you use. Lawn and garden equipment. My edge trimmer that I use in my front yard is battery powered. My chainsaw that I use to trim my trees is battery powered. Next time I replace a water heater or need a heat pump, those can be electric powered as well. Snow blowers are electric powered. There's an enormous amount of devices that historically have used carbon-based technologies to power them. And they usually, the smaller the engine block, the less efficient it is with power emissions. So doing your home electricity really gives you an opportunity to embrace some of these new technologies, and they also relieve you of the remember, I can't remember how many hours of my life I spent trying to get the pull cord to start that home lawnmower. Once the lawnmower gets more than 3 or 4 years old, that seems to be a perpetual challenge. You don't have any of those issues with electric motors. They start right up and they're very reliable and they last forever. So those are all other kind of things you get to do that not going to move the needle in a major way with global carbon emissions, but every little bit helps. And they're generally better technologies than the old fossil fuel based technologies that they're replacing. I did see a question about batteries, expected life. So when I'll tell you, I've been so impressed with the life. I bought my first electric vehicle in 2016. At that time, Tesla was projecting that at about 6 years, you'd see those batteries drop to probably 50 to 60% capacity. My electric vehicle from 2016 is still over 85% capacity of what it was when I purchased it. And as I've used some of these other technologies, the lithium-ion batteries, if if you make sure you do what's required to care for those batteries, the way that you store them, the way that you charge them, you've got to make sure you're up to speed on that. But they tend to have really impressive, useful lives and continue to be better than most of the projections I saw, whether you're talking about the battery in an electric vehicle or the batteries for some of the home appliances. So like I said, I'm at 7 going on 8 years and still seeing 85% plus performance in in some of the bigger batteries I have, and I've been just really pleased with others. Okay, other considerations if you get solar panels. I live in a snowy climate. You have to invest in a snow rake, and when you get a big snow, you got to get out there and move some of the snow off the panels. Now, the silicon in solar panels, what's nice though is that you don't have to get all the snow off, because there's a chemical reaction in solar panels that is actually what creates the power, where once the sun starts hitting some of them, it will generate heat in the panels. And so a lot of this snow will, because of the heat in the panels, will slide off. And so my snow rake doesn't reach the top of my roof, but I rake the panels, kind of the bottom layer. And then once they heat up, all the snow that's sitting higher will slide down further. Now, if you're, I know we had a huge snow year here in Utah this year. And there were people in some of the mountain locations that had solar powered cabins and had 3 feet of snow sitting on their panels. They had to be pretty disciplined about getting out and doing regular removal, because sometimes if the snow is only an inch or two, there's enough sun that gets through that'll heat them up. But when you've got a lot of snow on there, you've got to take the action to get, again, you don't have to get snow off some of the panels, but you got to get snow off enough of the panels that are getting sunlight will generate some heat, and that will create heat for the other panels. And then with your pitched roof, the snow will slide down. The other thing I'll tell you, just lesson learned, this snow, I have a garage area that also has panels above it. When the snow slides off in the winter, it slides off right in front of your garage, and then you end up having to do a little snow removal in front of your garage. And if you don't, sometimes it freezes, and then you have a little mound of snow you have to traverse in and out of your garage. So, I think all of the things being equal, I would avoid putting panels above garage doors or even just other entryway doors, because the snow does, once the panels heat up, the snow does slide down and will drop. And I've been hit by sliding snow a couple of times off my panels. Didn't do anything more than send a chill down my neck, and the snow went down there. But if you had a lot of snow, it could become problematic. So that's the snow removal side. Questions about cleaning the panels. And generally, I've never had to clean my panels. What I've read, if you live in a climate where there's either a lot of pollution in the air, a lot of dust in the air, blowing around, then you may have to get out and you can do it yourself. You can hire, most people that do window cleaning now also have picked up doing solar panel cleaning. But in the climate where I live, it doesn't prove necessary. The snow that falls out in the winter also does a nice job of cleaning a little bit, of the dust and dirt that sticks in the wintertime. So I've never had, in 2 houses, I've never felt a need to clean panels, but I certainly know people that have lived in other climates where there is maybe a lot more dust or even a lot more humidity in the air that causes dirt and other matter to stick the panels, that somebody has to get up there and clean them off once a year to really have them generate a capacity. They're not going to stop working, but as they get dirt on them, they won't operate as efficiency, and you may lose 10 or 20 or 30% of the generating capacity if your panels get dirty. Okay, I'm getting short on time here, so I'm just going to make a mention. I've got panels on my house. There is a ton of innovation going on right now with solar shingles. So this is, you don't put panels on, you just shingle your home, but the shingles are designed to, they essentially behave like solar panels. They're much more aesthetically pleasing. They look really nice. They're still really expensive and really hard to get. But if you're looking out, maybe not immediately, for the next few years, I'd really encourage you to look at solar shingles, because then you also don't have that other issue of putting new shingles on your house when you put panels on. You just put solar shingles on and you're done. So definitely, that's something to look at. I'll mention app proliferation. All these devices have different apps that control them. I really like the fact that my batteries and my automobiles from Tesla use the same app, whereas my solar panels and my Nest thermostats have a different app. So you just find yourself bouncing between apps a lot. Again, if you can find technologies that are complementary, there are some really nice advantages to using them together. Okay, last consideration. I don't know if anybody on this call is familiar with Devons Paradox. And for those of you that aren't, I'll just explain that Devons Paradox is this element of human nature that when the cost of a resource drops and becomes more plentiful, we naturally tend to use more of it. And it's easy once you get solar to just start using a lot more electricity. But ultimately, if you're using more electricity, you're being, I think, less good an earth steward than you could otherwise be. So there's still lots of technologies like smart thermostats, like putting timers on switches, opening windows to let cool air in the morning in the summer, and putting the blinds down when the sun's up. People, you'll still use clotheslines and as a way to save. So using the electricity you're generating sustainably doesn't mean you should just get it and then use everything you generate. Hopefully you can push some back to the grid and use what you have more sustainably. And there's lots of other both new and old technologies there for doing that. So that is my what I'd hope to cover today. I know we started a couple of minutes late, and Chloe, I know we're hitting time here. I just want to look and see the some of the questions in the bit. Go ahead, Chloe.
Oh, I was just you kind of actually touched on this a little bit, but Matthew Williams said, curious about home solar, but a lot of the ads make me wary. Seems like a lot of the credits, etc., are being exaggerated.
I don't think the credits are exaggerated. You can just go to any government website and get the credits. I think what gets exaggerated, and I know this is absolutely true, is the essentially, I mentioned earlier that not every company that particularly the leased arrangements, not every company is scrupulous on the costs of that over time and how much of their own profit they're going to bury in that cost. Whereas again, if you're buying the equipment yourself, it's a lot more clear, and you have lots of third-party sources you can go to just to say, hey, if I buy this many panels with this roof, this angle roof pitch, there's lots of calculators out there that aren't operated by people trying to sell you panels, where you can get really good, reliable information on what the cost of your energy will be versus the cost to install it and the rebates.
Gotcha. Do you know how people can find where their energy is coming from, like coal versus wind versus nuclear or something? Is there an easy place to find that, or you just have to do some investigative?
Yeah, generally your electric grid operator will have that information. They're required by law to report it to the federal government. They have some of them are more forthcoming than others. I've heard anecdotally, I haven't done this personally because my grid operator was pretty forthcoming, but in places of the country where they haven't been, you can actually send a request to the U.S. Department of Energy, and they can provide that information. So if you just go doe.gov for the US. I'm sure there are equivalents of those in other parts of the world, but usually your local energy, the grid that you're connecting to, they're generally forthcoming with the mix of resources they're used to generate the power that they're producing.
Gotcha. That's very interesting. Yeah, and Matthew says, I think this is just a response. Thanks. I suspect many of the zero upfront cost ads are the lease option you explained well, more profit for the company.
That's right. Yeah, I would say it's probably safe to say that all of the zero upfront cost arrangements are lease arrangements. And again, that might be the right arrangement for some people, because there is a certain amount of convenience that comes with that. But if you're willing to do just a little bit of your own homework, and you can make purchasing the equipment yourself work, it's considerably less expensive to do it that way.
I think someone else asked about recycling the solar panels. Yeah, what is the status of recycling for expired panels?
Yeah, so because not a lot of panels are being recycled yet, there's not a big industry for that. But there are, just like with aluminum recycling, there are organizations emerging that are doing both battery recycling that's used on solar arrays and electric automobiles, as well as for the panels themselves. Again, because the panels useful life for 25 to 30 years, there just aren't a lot of panels that are reaching that recycle phase of their life yet. What's good about panels is even if you just were to stack them in a junkyard, they're not going to produce carbon emissions. But there are absolutely technologies being developed to recycle panels and all the silicon and other components that are a part of them for reuse, and that will be, I expect, a really big industry, 15 to 20 years from now, when we start to see a lot of the panels that have been installed in the last 10 or 12 years reach that point in their life where they're just not very productive anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting to me that between 2009 and 2015, right? Is that when you started that the return on investment decreased that much? 40 years to
it's like a lot of new technologies, the stuff is really expensive at first, and then once the volume of it scales and production scales and all the supply lines to produce it scale, the costs drop considerably. The cost drop curve is still pretty steep for panels and even steeper for batteries. So, if you buy batteries today, they're a lot cheaper than when I bought my batteries 3 years ago. I don't even like to look at what I paid for my batteries versus what they are now, because I think they're like almost 40% cheaper than they were 3 years ago. And 5 years from now, they'll probably half or even a third the cost of what they are now. And that's just because all the manufacturers will have, they've got their factories up and running now. They've got all their distribution lines running efficiently, and all their supply lines to get the supplies in efficiently. And so with volume, the cost drops significantly over time.
Gotcha. Let's see, we probably have time for one more question since we started a little late. Anybody else want to ask anything?
Maybe I could ask. We do have solar panels. They're only a year old. The people we bought, the company we use for our installation, they had a program where you could continue to have like a contract with them where the maintenance costs, if there were any, would be covered by them.
Yeah.
Or for an X amount per year or not. And it seemed like that we chose not to carry that additional insurance or expense with the expectation that it wasn't likely we'd have a lot of expenses. Do you have an opinion from your experience on that particular choice?
Yeah, Mary Kay, I considered some of those same offers, those service contracts. Did you buy your panels, then consider it a service contract to maintain?
Yeah, we bought our panels, and this is a service contract that would have been provided by, they included the first year for free. And then it's like, if you wanted to continue, then there would have been a fee.
Yeah. Yeah, I literally have never had to pay a penny to anybody with either the homes I put panels on for service after installation. And because I know the people that actually bought the house that I put my first panels on, are in our ward. They've never had to, and they're hitting 9 years on those.
Yeah.
So, again, if you're living somewhere where maybe there's some natural climate related, maybe a lot of high winds or debris in the air or flood risk that might damage some of your electronics. I mean, maybe, but I certainly felt like I made the right decision not buying a service contract with either of the panel arrays that I installed.
Gotcha. Thank you. Well, we'll go ahead and end it there. Thank you, Mike, so much. That was so interesting and such like a practical, good guide. So this will be up on YouTube if you want to share it with anyone, or if anyone else has more questions or wants to revisit something. Probably next week will be up there, and Mike's email address is there. I'm sure he would love to answer any more questions if anybody has them.
I love talking to people about this stuff in my experience, as you probably noticed. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can support you on your solar energy journey in any way.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Next week we will be hearing, or not next week, next month we'll be hearing from a BYU professor about some of his research regarding air quality. So with that being said, I'll let you guys go and have a good night, everyone. We will see you next month.
Thanks, Chloe. Thanks, everybody.